to make sure before we, yeah, okay. So should we go? Yeah. I'm going to perform the removal of the mask. I'm next to an air filtration device. We're in real life at MIT, and everyone in the real life audience is wearing their mask. So that's the MIT medical suggestion, that there always be one mask between us. I'm so happy to welcome you here today at the Long Lounge of the Department of Architecture in the School of Architecture and Planning. I want to begin by thanking Dean Hashem Sarkis, who had the initial vision that media making was an important part of what we do at the School of Architecture and Planning here at MIT, even before he learned what a significant part of our past had been devoted to filmmaking under the amazing leadership of Ricky Leacock, starting in the late 60s, and Gloriana Davenport carrying on through the 80s. But vision, of course, needs support. And for today's events, I want to thank the Arts at MIT under the leadership of Leela Kinney, MIT.nano, with the open-minded folks like Brian Antony and Tom Gearty, who see sensing at the nanoscale an important link with the arts. I want to thank the MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality under the leadership of Professor Fox Harrell. I want to thank the Virtual Experience Design Lab at MIT in this school, which serves the entire School of Architecture and Planning, helps the students at Art, Culture, and Technology program and the Department of Architecture, who supplied tremendous resources, all these groups, of material, equipment, sweat equity, and expertise, which are secretly behind the virtual. And of course, the founding donors for the Transmedia Storytelling Initiative itself, David and Nina Fialco. I hope they're able to stream in on today's amazing events. More personally, I want to thank Transmedia team members, Dr. Chadi Zaman, who became a father a week ago. In architecture, Chadi manages both his own NSF-supported research into virtual amendments to the human and his Virtual Experience Design Lab. I also want to thank the independent filmmaker, artist, and transmedia producer, Dennis Tortum, who's chairing this early afternoon's panel. And Dennis and Chadi both emphasized that virtual production was indeed the theme we should conjure with in this capstone symposium for the Transmedia Storytelling Initiative. They, of course, as we all, were living this reality during a pandemic that forced Zaman's class on virtuality and presence, which he taught with Professor Fox Harrell in the fall of 2020, and Zaman's later collaboration with Dennis Tortum on graduate workshops on virtuality last spring, entirely into remote classrooms, right? So where was the presence part of this dyad, virtuality and presence? The work of students in the Transmedia Storytelling Initiative's first physical exhibition reflects our pandemical condition and also the acceleration of virtuality in all domains. And it reflects the acceleration of isolation, for which virtuality only partially compensates. This exhibition, titled Unbounded, Transmedia Storytelling at MIT 2019-2021, is on view at the Wiesner Gallery in the Stratton Student Center across Mass Ave from where we are at the moment. And I really want to recommend it, not the least for its brilliant exhibition design by architecture alumni Dalma Foldesi and Jung Inseo. The exhibition and many, many production details of this symposium were produced by absolutely indispensable production RAs Yimeng Emetsu and the newly enrolled Alejandra Medina, both ACT graduates of the Art, Culture, Technology program. Alejandro, of course, is just beginning here, and he hit the ground running. Emma and Alejandro turned the hectic schedule of production this fall into an exhilarating and really joyful experience. So here we are, living the hybrid condition that this symposium addresses, carrying our meat machines, some of us, into this room, Or maybe our meat machines are facing a screen somewhere, bringing with them their mysterious capacities for sensing and making reality out of a physical world of electromagnetic, haptic, and olfactory information. Those capacities, the boundary conditions alluded to in our title, are both limits and portals into an entirely fabulous virtuality that humans feel compelled to produce. Pixels and bits, point clouds and pointers, we love our mediated realities. We hate them too, but mostly we love them. They seem to give us the goads for culturally transforming ourselves into alternate selves. Now, more urgently than ever, those alternatives are needed to the hypothesized selfish genes or the hyper-individuals of before times. The alternatives our brilliant panelists explore open out onto compassion, parenting, wonder, and sometimes trauma. They might direct us toward alternative ways of living with the planet in the future. So practically, here's how the day unfolds. From now until 1:30, we have this first panel on virtual life engines, which will be moderated by Dennis Tortum, who will introduce our amazing panelists. From 2 to 4:30, panel 2 will be physically present here at MIT. They'll be lined up somewhere in the front of this room, appropriately enough, thinking about space and time, moderated by Tobias Putre, who will introduce those panelists. Finally, we're thrilled to have an in-person plenary tonight between legendary crafter of cinematic story worlds, Douglas Trumbull, and head of our own architecture department, Nicolas de Monchaux. There are opportunities for Q&A on all of our streaming platforms. Please use them, as well as here in person. So join us in welcoming our panelists to begin this inquiry into the boundary conditions of our virtual worlds. Thank you. Dennis, take it away.
Thank you, Caroline, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Tortum. I'm a producer here at the Transmedia Storytelling Initiative. And this is our first panel of the day called Virtual Life Engines. And we are here with our panelists, Ian Cheng, Veronica So, Ivailo Getov, and Judith Berry. In this panel, we will explore immersive story worlds and liveliness in these simulated worlds, and what thrives in this metaverse, and how does virtual life unfold to tap into our tendency for perceiving liveliness in these worlds. So first, Ian, Veronica, and Ivailo will talk about Life After Bob, especially the first installment of Life After Bob project, The Chalice Study, which is a real-time animation, and it's a science fiction narrative that is set in the near future where AI entities cohabit our minds. And at the center of this work, there's a poignant father-daughter story. Then Judith Berry will give a response to Life After Bob, and then we will have a conversation together. And soon after, we will open it up for audience questions. I was personally really impressed by Life After Bob. I was impressed by the emotional range and complexity of the story, and also the technological and narrative implications of using real-time engines for storytelling. And the story world was very complex, and I very much enjoyed being both immersed in the story world, but also being lost in it. And Life After Bob is currently on view at the Shed in New York City through December. And now I'll quickly introduce our panelists before passing the mic to them. Ian Cheng is an artist, and he draws on principles of video game design, improvisation, and cognitive science. And he has produced a series of simulations exploring an agent's capacity to deal with an ever-evolving environment. Recently, he has developed Bob, which stands for Bag of Beliefs. It's an AI creature whose personality, body, and life story evolve across exhibitions. And the most recent piece that we will focus on today is called Life After Bob, a narrative animation that uses both traditional animation techniques alongside the real-time game engine Unity. Veronica So is a producer and a writer across fine art, technology, animation, and gaming. She brings together diverse players for technically challenging projects and she works closely with artists, curators, game designers, programmers, and art institutions to realize these experiential projects. And for the past 6 years, she has been working closely with Cheng on live simulation and AI work, and she's the producer of Life After Bob. And Ivailo Ghetto is the technical producer of Life After Bob, and he's a technical director and a producer of interactive art and experiences. He's merging his filmmaking background with emerging tech, and he specializes in interaction design and software architecture for public experiences. Also, currently, he is the head of interactive at Dandelion and Burdock. And finally, Judith Berry, who's our respondent today. Judith Berry is an artist and writer whose research-based practice combines multiple disciplines and forms of artistic production to question technologies of representation. These include cinema, media, exhibition design, performance, architecture, sculpture, and photography. Judith is professor in the Art Culture Technology program here at MIT. So I would like to pass it to Ian, Veronica, and Ivailo to start with their presentation.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dennis. And on behalf of myself, Veronica So, and Ivailo Ghetto, we're like super proud and happy to present Life After Bob here at MIT with you all. I'm sorry we can't be there in person, but that's sort of the nature of our production. We're coming from all different parts of the US right now, and that's the way it's been for the last 2 years. I want to just introduce the project first by giving a little background on what happened before Life After Bob that led to it. I'm an artist, and since 2012, 2013, I started making simulations using the Unity video game engine as my primary mode of working. I was very attracted to making simulations because the moment right before it, I was trying to do very detailed animation using motion capture, and found the tedium of it was extremely exciting as an artist, you know, when you can like bury yourself in your studio and your work and work on something, you know, with great detail, and that can suffuse you with a sense of containment and a space to work in that you can feel focused in. But more and more I felt drawn to the feeling that artwork that really excites me when I see it are works that feel alive, that have an energetic quality to it due to their aliveness. And so I was really struck by the tools that I discovered in the Unity video game engine, and I thought I should make a video game that plays itself. That's another way of saying to make a simulation, kind of an ecosystem with different characters and different plants and animals that all had basic behaviors, but put together in a kind of arena would produce new emergent behaviors and effects on the ecosystem itself. In 2015, I started working with Veronica So. My now wife, Rachel Rose, an artist, introduced us, and she, to my credit, to credit of my wife, she said, "Ian, I see that you're working really hard on these simulations, but you're getting really nerdy about all these little details. And at a certain point, like if you want to make something more expansive, you talk about all these things, all these ways in which the simulations could be bigger and better, more complex. You're gonna have to like work with people, and I know just the person." And so she introduced me to her friend Veronica, and so Veronica and I met and started working together in 2015, and that was a real turning point in the simulations. We worked on what's called the Emissaries Trilogy, and that was a triptych of simulations that took place in a vast ecosystem, and the key difference was that these simulations had a virtual agents in them, one of which had a scripted narrative that produced conflict with all the other unscripted, basic AI-driven agents in the ecosystem. Prior to working with Veronica, most of my simulations I would regard as pretty meaningless, not in the sense that they were uninteresting. They were very like pleasurable to make. They had very interesting properties of moving and changing forever. They had a sense of aliveness, the way that when you look out, I don't know, at out your window or at a park, it has a sense of aliveness, but it lacked the kind of sense of meaning that I think maybe I was striving for as an artist. And also I think we strive for inherently when we look at art, especially complex artworks. The complexity of an artwork should reward itself with some meaning. And I thought, oh, finally with Emissaries and working with Veronica, we developed a kind of a narrative story for one agent that would then be in conflict with all the other agents, and that it would then be this wrestling match between a deterministic narrative and an open-ended simulation. And so that spanned three works, and then shortly thereafter, we worked on a AI creature called Bob. And this is when Veronica and I were introduced to Ivaylo Getov, who became the technical director in the second iteration of Bob. And just to say a quick word on Bob, we tried to imagine seriously the problem of an artificial life form as an artwork. And if you think of an artwork as a compositional space, could a life form be a compositional space? Could the boundaries of a life, how something is born, how something is die, and the personality and life path in between, could that be the subject of an artwork and the container of the artwork? We think of painting as having, a compositional space, and you have to mind the edges of a painting. Could a life be a compositional space? And so we spent a great deal of time producing the morphology and movement of Bob to be physically simulated. And then we spent a whole other epoch of time in 2018 to develop Bob's cognitive architecture, which was based on a neurosymbolic approach to AI, which maybe we can get into later. Finally, just to wrap up here, when we finished Bob, I was personally so jazzed and excited by Bob as a potential AI life form that were I to were the technological landscape that we live in were to evolve further, and were I to have the energy to do more with Bob, well, then Bob could be this AI little character that could maybe eventually influence your own life, maybe coach your own life. When things like neuro interfaces emerge, it could beam into your head. But at the same time, I was becoming a new dad. My daughter was about to be born. And I just said, I can't do AI right now. AI is just too crazy and too taxing and too heavy. And I thought, oh, we should shift to something easy. Let's do storytelling. And I was so fucking wrong. Storytelling is its own very crowded, hyper complex beast. And I'm totally humbled by anyone who's a storyteller. But as with all things, not being in your lane, I don't know, allows you to discover things for yourself and do things differently. And so that's what led to Life After Bob. I think we have some slides to share. So maybe we can start presenting this. So just to say real briefly, Life After Bob started with the notion that we're going to take this character of Bob, and at the time I was about to have a daughter, and so I wanted to create a father-daughter story. I was very struck by this thing that Stephen King wrote, where he wrote The Shining in relationship to himself becoming a father. And the thing that he made The Shining about was he imagined what was the worst kind of dad he could possibly be. Well, it would be an alcoholic who had writer's block and couldn't be a good parent and couldn't be a good writer. And I thought, I was very anxious about becoming a new dad. And I thought, what's the worst father I could be? Let's play that out. That is, rife subject for my life right now. And I thought, oh, it's a guy who conflates his work with his kid. It's a guy who says his work and his kid are the same thing and tries to put them all in one basket. And of course, there's conflict in that. And so that led to the story of Life After Bob, which started as a 16-page manga that I worked on with Veronica, almost as a proof of concept for the world and this kind of father-daughter story. Really briefly, the premise of Life After Bob is a neuroscientist, Dr. Wong, invents an AI called Bob, which stands for Bag of Beliefs, in the hopes of and injects it, downloads it into, connects it to his daughter's brain in hopes that it would become a kind of life coach and a kind of co-parent for her as she grows up. And the idea was that maybe Bob can help a child navigate becoming a satisfied an adult with a satisfactory life path. It's kind of a coming of age story, and can AI help a coming of age story? Of course, over time, Chalice, she's a 10-year-old girl when we meet her, abdicates more and more responsibility to Bob in her life, especially dealing with conflicts to do with her dad and to do with the world of the adults around her. And she's quite content with this relationship, with this kind of codependent relationship with Bob. But of course, as Bob assumes more responsibility, Dr. Wong, her father, falls in love with the Bob side of Chalice. Bob can literally, we call it droning in the film, drone Chalice's body, meaning take over her nervous system and kind of voluntarily kind of puppeteer her to do things. Meanwhile, she's consciously off in some other kind of mental internet space, playing different games, doing other kinds of activities that have that allow her to avoid the conflicts of life. Dr. Wong falls more and more in love with Chalice, and at a certain point, all the other adults fall in love with the Bob side of Chalice too. And so Chalice, the human side of Chalice, is left kind of hanging. What's left for her to do? She becomes very jealous of Bob, and not to spoil anything, but basically she's confronted with the decision later in her life. Excuse me, she gets lost in this kind of neural game as she is feeling jealous, and what feels like 10 seconds in her real life or 10 years in her actual life. And so Bob has lived in her life for 10 years, that we find out about midway through the film. And not to ruin anything, but Chalice has to kind of come to the decision of whether or not the life that Bob is created for is her life, or if it's a case of AI gone bad. Or if it's something that is part of her life and has to be kind of integrated somehow, kind of classic coming of age stuff, but through the lens of this post-AI world. I'm gonna let Revila and Veronica speak over what we're looking at now. So this is kind of getting into the kind of early pre-production process, which was right around when the pandemic hit. So I think this is a good maybe moment to transition to the how the team started to work.
I guess I'll talk about this. I'm Veronica, the producer of Life After Bob, and Ian's producer. When Ian came to me with this manga, I got so excited. I was like, this is like the juiciest, most original IP I've ever seen. And let's totally do this. And so we had to start engaging in traditional processes. Like, Ian, you have to write a script. So he worked all summer on a script. And then I was thinking, well, if it's going to be animated, we're going to need to understand the animation process. And we're going to need to talk to some folks who are doing, who have been doing animation. And if indeed we're going to use Unity, build it in a game engine, we're going to have to talk to some folks at Unity. We're going to have to go to Graph, go to Unite, try and get some expertise. And even at that point, Unite was only just starting to their cinematic toolkit, but they were really excited that we were doing this, and kind of became a really exciting kind of rolling stone, where we were just like, okay, well then we need concept artists and we need production designers. So we just started gathering all this imagery and interviewing with all these production designers, like the Ellie Michalka works on Steven Universe, and these are people who work their day-to-day is just working on backgrounds and concept designs. And this active worlding was particularly exciting for Ian. He finally got the chance to, instead of just like working on AI or working on programming, he finally got to draw and collaborate with other artists to develop visually this world, and conceptually what the characters might be up to. So we're just showing right now, these slides are just showing, our cast of characters and some development in that process. But the hiring for a movie is a really very different process than hiring for an artist studio, and certainly even for a game development studio. The nice thing about Ian's projects is they're always so diverse. We've gone from doing AR projects to AI projects, like Unity interactive games, and this one was like a huge leap forward. And so we were hiring up until like from the first moment. We were like, we had some people we liked on Instagram. Let's email them and see if they have some time to do some drawings, up until the last minute where we were doing post-production, and Ian really needed some particle systems and really cool effects. So we were, we were hiring, and I like to call it kind of like first dating up until the end, and that meeting so many people and getting to work with so many people was like really inspiring for us.
Yeah, I think just to build on that a little bit and to sort of get a little bit deeper into the production process itself, right? So I think that Ian, came to Veronica and myself wanting to engage with narrative in a way that he hadn't, maybe played with in a few projects, and we were really excited about that because, as Veronica was saying, there is this opportunity to work with these traditional processes and these, ways of building out this world that kind of have roots in the tools of filmmaking and the tools of game design and game creation. But the thing that we kept hearing is, this is a really ambitious project. Your timeline, you have an exhibition date, which at the time, before we knew that COVID was coming, was actually, only a year or so out. You have an exhibition date that does not necessarily feel reachable for a project of this scale. And I think we had to really steer and understand why people were saying that to us, but also push back on that a bit because of the history that we had in producing these live interactive works for Ian's prior projects and for similar projects that we've worked on. And in some sense, you can see here a screenshot of us doing production motion capture remotely over Zoom. In some sense, just the notion that everybody all of a sudden was thrust into working remotely, working at home, working with little screens of Zoom, became a real asset for us to just kind of convince people how to take their module of the project, their little piece of the world, and really have a way to focus their energy on that. And we would be sort of at this higher level managing and understanding how these pieces would come together. So really the early part of this process was around us kind of setting up a trajectory for all of these people that were experts in their fields, right? This is a clip of our motion builder pipeline. We had a motion builder hire on this who was fantastic. I mean, Veronica, I forget what his prior experience was, but it was on like James Cameron movies. But it was leveraging the experience of all these people who were really, really good at the work that we were hoping to bring them on to do. But it was our prior history here. You could see some clips of working with real-time public animation and simulation that kind of gave us the confidence to push through the traditional kind of limitations and develop a pipeline for this project, kind of marrying the best of both worlds, right? Getting these beautiful concept art, getting these storyboards, getting a script, passed, but also understanding that we had kind of an approach to assembling these worlds. So these are all clips of prior projects from Ian's work. Unfortunately, as soon as you commit to working in real time in the Unity game engine and deciding that you're not going to have a printed out version of the movie, you're always going to have it playing. You set it up for the first time in its first exhibition, and it looks like this. And you have a whole new kind of path of debugging that you have to engage in, and of course that means that there's late nights staying up trying to figure out what it is that's going wrong, why certain things aren't working a certain way, and you end up here. And probably Ian could speak a little bit to this feeling, and we can sort of talk about like why even engage with it in this way. And I think that really begins to touch on the excitement of this project beyond just the animation.
Yeah, so the question of why Unity, why bother making an animated film? This turned out to be 48 minutes. Why bother making something at that length using a video game engine? And I have to say, on some extremely basic level, as an artist, I always like kind of trying to do something that's not in my lane and trying to do it in a different way. And I think that's maybe a compulsive thing, but I think in a more serious way, I think all the prior simulations had this very beautiful thing that would always happen at the moment of an exhibition, which was that oh, there's another update that needs to happen. And I realized like prior to that, when you make art, you think of art as has a kind of finality when it's finally displayed. A sculpture or painting kind of stops there, more or less. But in software, the culture of software and software making is completely alive. Again, it's this thing of aliveness, not just on the viewer's point of view, but from the point of view of production. And when you make software, things are in update cycles. There's no finality to it. It's a living, breathing kind of city of code. When you make software, I mean, I remember Google released Gmail before they even had like, I don't know, like BCC features, and they already had like 2 million users or actively using it. And the thing about using software, my attraction to software as a live update cycle for making artworks and for making potentially films, is that you can start to treat filmmaking as a software project. And the affordances of a software project is that, well, you can make updates that are quite fluid. You know, if you do it working in Unity, it allowed a certain fluidity to make respond to viewer feedback, respond to changes in how myself or the team felt throughout the process. There's a longer history of this in a more old school way. You know, George Lucas meddling with Star Wars years later, director's cuts from like Ridley Scott's Blade Runner or Alien. And I was always like inspired by those things, but they always felt so janky and kludgy because, well, the tools weren't there to make updates. And it was a really big deal when the director of a film dragged it out of the bins and made a new update. Now we can, or that was my intuition. Now you can treat filmmaking as software, equivalent to software making. And so that was like a huge reason to start in Unity. And then the other reason was that I think I had a really big hunch. We decided to do in Unity in 2019. I had a really big hunch that there would just be more metaversal things that we could do. And I think that hunch is now playing out, that if we were to make a film in Unity, all the characters, all the animation, the props, the settings, all the procedural animation in the background, that could then be easily, derived into other kinds of interactive projects. We could begin now to integrate things like maybe there will be a crypto economy to do with Life After Bob, where fans of Life After Bob like earn dividends for literally just being fans for having watched it. There's all these new hooks for pragmatic technical hooks for ways in which people can fall in love with the world and actually feel a kind of a membership or even an ownership into a world. And so that was another kind of fundamental investment into making this in Unity. And then lastly, I would say, just I want to add one more thing, which is what we're going to see soon right now is there's a lot of procedural animation that is occurring in the background of Life After Bob. You know, we had 4 animators on this project doing the primary character animations, but there's so much else in the film requires animation that's never talked about. There's VFX, there's crowds, there's all the animals, there's all the little things that move in a cinematic frame. Not all of them need to be animated by hand. And Unity, working in Unity was such a pleasure to discover that we could do all those things with relatively a tight budget and an intimate team.
Yeah, what I wanted to just not to roll back, but just from a pragmatic standpoint, one of the things that we were able to do in Unity is treat the world as a physical world, right? So after the animators who would engage with their sort of process after the motion capture, after they brought their animations into Unity, we set it up in this physical simulation space. And our director of photography, our person who was in charge of lighting and camera angles, had never worked with a digital production suite ever before, and was able to sit there and move lights around as if they were lighting a scene of actual real people acting on a set. And I think that was just one of these, again, insights of borrowing something that's been an established practice. Like, we're not inventing some crazy new technique, but we're borrowing the best of a traditional filmmaking technique into this new pipeline, this new assemblage of world building that benefits us both from like a time perspective and a quality perspective. And then what we're seeing now, again, is what Ian was just sort of alluding to, is we have all these background characters that aren't actors, they aren't people with lines, and so we can procedurally generate any number of permutations of background characters. At the bottom of the screen there, you see a number of wardrobe options that our producer, who in a past life was a fashion designer, Veronica, developed all these procedural wardrobes for our background characters, and we're able to end up with something like this, which would be like a background actor crowd simulation, which involved no animators. This involved just all game design skills and sort of procedural simulation. And then I think Ian spoke to this a little bit, and probably the most interesting thing to lead into for the remainder of this talk and this panel is one of the fundamental reasons for working in Unity was that this was never meant to just be a film. There is an extended kind of world that this film implies, and the way it's currently installed at the shed, and one of the visions for how this episode would kind of establish that world is this interactive world watching mode that you can sort of see a video of on your screen right now. And the way this would work is in parallel to the movie playing on the screen in the exhibition hall, there would be another screen that you could approach, connect to a local URL with your phone. Just go to lifeafterbob.io, and you could then play through the movie, pause it, fast forward, rewind, and use your phone as a cursor to select things in the world and find more information about that world, which would be connected to this wiki. So Ian, again, I want to punt it over to Ian to sort of like give us a little more detail on where this idea came from. But fundamental from the very beginning of the project was this idea of extended information living on a wiki, separate from the movie itself.
Yeah, it's just really briefly. So the idea of the wiki was really inspired by all the kind of fandom wikis that you see naturally emerge when people fall in love with a particular sci-fi or fantasy world or video game. There's like obviously a Star Wars like Wikipedia. There's like Harry Potter wikis. There's a wiki for probably every major video game. And what it indicates is that when you fall in love with the world, there's more details in the world than are initially produced or shown in the primary canonical media, whether that's the movie or the primary video game. And we really wanted to just kind of jumpstart that process and also feel what it'd be like to encapsulate some of the pretty deeply thought out lore and mythology of the Life After Bob world that simply could not be fully captured in the film itself, but that you could maybe, if you could somehow magically interact with a movie, pause the movie, click on anything in the frame, and the camera would zoom in and display like in a very basic way more mythology about that tiny background object in Chalice's apartment. That you would find that there's riches to be discovered there. And that was kind of a dream that was born out of my daughter. Again, I was reading her The Hungry Caterpillar, and I would read her that every night. And at a certain point, she was just bored with the story. I mean, she knew what the story happens. He gets a tummy ache because he ate too much food, and he has to eat a green leaf and he becomes a butterfly. But there's so many pages where there's really like beautiful detail in the page, and it's part of the world of The Hungry Caterpillar, Eric Carle's world. And she would say, Daddy, stop, and E didn't go in. She wanted to go into the page. She didn't want to move across the left to right on the page. She wanted to go in. Left to right is narrative storytelling, linear storytelling. She wanted to go into the world. And I think this is something very magical that can only happen once you fall in love first, once you're like kind of baited and hooked and portaled in with a story, and the story, then you can really dive into the world, and that can be endless. That was my first dream when my parents took me to Disneyland, that I would really understand how and what Mickey did with his life. Like, who was Mickey's neighbors? What did he drink? Did he have milk for breakfast? And when you go to Disneyland, you discover all those trivial details that mean the world to you when you fall in love with a character. And so one of the initial ambitions of Life After Bob was to start and take story extremely seriously, but then have that be fundamentally a portal to a larger world, and a world that could be an investment in future episodes, could be complete tangents in mythology and lore that perhaps one day a fan will take up, or it could be a source of fertile inspiration that we didn't know from the get-go that like samurai sword in the background would have any meaning, but like now it's inspired a whole episode in my mind. And so it became a generative sandbox on top of trying to take story very seriously.
And then to be clear, like just to make sure people understand, like the wiki can be edited by anybody. It's not just us editing the wiki. It's this extended world that can be populated with detail by people who want to populate it because of that sort of obsession that people get with sort of deeper story and deeper meaning. Sorry, Veronica, I didn't mean to cut you off.
As like a person who read like, many versions of the script, a lot of times I picked up a lot of detail and I just I like latched onto it, and maybe it got lost in the wayside. But when we were starting to populate this wiki with information, like the fan fiction writer just came out in me, and I was just like, imagining, maybe 10 years ago, what were these characters doing, or what did this seemingly meaningless object, why is it so compelling in this apartment scene, and hopefully like people will start to engage with that and maybe one day have an effect on the world too.
Do we have time to show the trailer? I mean, just before we kick off the rest of the talk, the last thing would be a 3-minute trailer.
Yeah, I'd love to show the trailer just to give the viewers, everyone, a sense of what we've all been talking about here.
Anomics,
You have
Chalice.
to break my brain before I break
Anomics
contract.
audit, December 31st. Tell me your name.
Well, run away!
If I promise you can keep Bob, can you tell me your name?
Chalice, the post-human cyborg superweapon brain witch.
Age?
10.
What does Bob do for you?
Let's merge. Thank you. We're aligned. Help me arrive at my destiny, but later, not now. Let's continue path planning.
Good. What happens if something gets in
I'm
the
the
way?
inventor of Bob.
Destiny Bobs ain't the anomic cure we hoped for.
Bob.
Germanava, wait.
Have her decontract Bob.
Chalice would not survive. Bob, do something. Bob fixes it.
Good. And what about life after Bob?
Bob, don't.
What happens then?
Permission to join me. Perfect.
Chalice, welcome to my timeline, little guy. Whoa! Chalice, just get a feel for my figure.
This isn't part of the campaign.
Interesting.
Interesting.
That's my life, Bob.
Oh, Bob, I hate you.
I'm allowed to die? I don't know. Maybe a humanista assassinates me.
Ava, ignore that. Anomics audit January 1st. Tell me your name.
The Chalice Study.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for this very inspiring presentation. And I would like to pass the virtual mic to Judith now.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, everyone, for presenting. It was really fascinating to learn about your relationship to narrative cinema as you built this project. And I was just reminded when you were discussing it, can everyone hear me? Because I can't see if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, oh, good. Okay. I was reminded of the history of cinema as it developed into a rule-based system where you may know this from reading about cinema history, that cinema might have died out had it not been able to appropriate other older forms of storytelling, such as the theater and melodrama. And early cinema, like much of game design, particularly Unity, is very rule-based, and it's based in a language that's constructed over time to make believable, inhabitable space, which can unfold as you engage with the space. So it coheres what are essentially discontinuous frames visually by making use of small lesions in time and space, producing a verisimilitude that makes cinematic space inhabitable for the viewer, and which allows the viewer as they watch to identify with multiple characters' points of view, such that it seems that what is happening is actually happening to you as you watch it. And this is, when you mentioned that, Ian, about wanting to jump into the page, it really reminded me of what Christian Metz, the film theorist and semiotics professor, called the wide awake daydream, which is something that happens in especially classic Hollywood film. And as I was thinking about what you were presenting today, I was also remembering the Emissaries show that I saw at PS1, where you were making use of emergent technologies. Spatially, that narrative structure seemed to be most like the structure of an animation, where there were often big ellipses in time and space alongside elements of surprise and even sight gags in that work. And I was really wondering, thinking about your work and the work that you all three showed today, how exactly you're making use of narrative storytelling techniques through this kind of history of making use of aliveness and virtual agents and the kinds of conflicts that you can set up. So I'm just recounting a little bit your history just to tell you where my thoughts are kind of coming from. One of the things that I really liked about Emissaries was that even though it didn't have necessarily a narrative POV, it allowed for seemingly chance operations, and you as a viewer would connect the dots between the three screens and the three, as I recall, different rooms at PS1. And we could all do that because we've had a long history of engaging over 80 years with things like jump cuts, the internet, and all sorts of other things that have produced new forms of storytelling. And so I really applaud you for doing that. There's also something I think that happened in Emissaries, which was a form of visual excitation, where the gag and sometimes even more spectacular forms of special effects filmically sutured you as a viewer into the experience in a very particular way. So I thought with Emissaries, in fact, that you had, each person had their own unique individual experience of that particular work in a way that perhaps when you watch the single channel version of Life After Bob, you may not necessarily have that unless you go to the other side. And I also wanted to briefly ask a couple of questions about Bob as an AI entity on a trajectory towards sentience, which is a hybrid quote from you, Ian, because I was curious about how Bob was programmed to actually engage with people. And I wondered, thinking of the new work, how this new version of Bob is programmed for Chalice to use or be used by Chalice or vice versa, because Bob as a bag of beliefs also seems to imply a kind of ontology, such as its being and its becoming in relationship to human nature. And I wondered if you had actually made rules about Bob to that the viewer could discover as the viewer played with Bob, the way you do when you play a video game where you play it over and over and over again. And so I was quite curious about that. And then with Life After Bob, it seems that you, as you mentioned, you developed a real story world complete with a wiki, which also includes this very specific lexicon of many terms, such as the permadrone, which provide for many more plot points. And it seems that the plot points in the narrative in Life After Bob are really interesting. And I think for me, as a, come out of film theory and filmmaking a little bit, for me, that's really very radical, because it as you said, and all of you said in different ways in your discussion, this would allow for the viewer activator to affect the wiki, and potentially, possibly, there could be some kind of programming. I'm not sure exactly what, because I don't really know how to program at all, in fact. But it seems like there would be a way for viewers to potentially program alongside or with you in some form as they engage with the work. And this, of course, would invite multiple viewings and multiple playing of Life After Bob. And I was very interested in that. And I was wondering, you know, how in the single channel version, you might make the lexicon and all of the different elements more visible. Again, invoking the history of telling a story using small illusions in time and space that you might in narrative film, but including more clues for the viewer. Because sometimes I wasn't quite sure, as I watched it at the shed twice and went to the other side, but I sometimes wasn't quite sure of what I was missing or some of the key story points of Chalice's relationship to Bob and to her father. And so I was just curious if you could talk more about that. And then I also wondering about the role of Dr. Wong in the film, because that's honestly autobiographical. And I saw that on the shed page, you had a list of readings, which I thought was great, actually. But you didn't have Winnicott. And for me, Ian, you seemed like you were appropriating his notion of the good enough mother to be the good enough father, the good enough caretaker. And, you know, in his theory, he responds to the infant child as over time, so that you respond responsively, but you don't answer the cry all the time. This is supposed to teach the child to make an easier transition to autonomy. And not responding, of course, allows the child to develop a tolerance for frustration and waiting by not always having its needs taken care of. And I thought that could be, you know, going further, thinking of this as this, I think I read it was 16 chapters, this being the first one. I thought that could really be an interesting direction to pursue, is to develop that relationship more. I also was curious about the relationship of Chalice's life that she lived on her own outside of Bob, because I couldn't quite fathom that, even seeing it twice. And I wondered, for example, if she had some relationship to psychosis, and was she living a double life for this 10 years? Because maybe I missed it, but I didn't see it in the animation on the single channel version. Or was she aware or unaware of Bob living her life for her? It seems like from what you said, she was, but it also reminded me of Melanie Klein's discussion of the fantasies the child has alongside a wish for death, the death instinct. And so I was just very curious about how, or if that was part of the characterization of the Chalice character. All of which is to say, I would really love to know more about the narrative structure of Life After Bob, and also more particularly about the AI strategies that you're using, because it seems also in your work that you're going for an artwork that continuously remakes itself on each viewing. And I've noticed talking with other artists, they're also after this artwork that is not permanent, that actually can reinvent itself upon each interaction with a viewer or with a group of people. And I think that's maybe a trend in the art world right now. That's a very nauseant trend as art and science, in quotes, become more in the fore of art making practices. But I just wondered if you wanted to comment on any of this. But most of all, I want to thank all three of you for really unpacking Life After Bob.
Cool. Thank you, Judith, for those amazing thoughts. I mean, I just want to say really briefly, I'm really into Carl Jung, and Jung talks a lot about archetypes. And I definitely approached the early part of making Life After Bob and the character characters in this episode, but also planned future episodes from the point of view of trying to work with archetypes, especially in a live video game engine. And when you were talking about emissaries, a lot of where emissaries came from was just taking archetypes that we know. And in the case of Life After Bob, you know, Dr. Wong, you can think of as a very kind of monomaniacal, like very focused, reclusive scientist, and his kind of antagonist in the film, this CEO character called Z. He's kind of a newer archetype. He's kind of a reckless CEO. I was very inspired by this thing that Elon Musk did, where he tweeted out, thinking of taking Tesla private, like funding secured, and it created all these SEC problems, created all this panic amongst his investors. And it was this very new archetype of a CEO who has the means and the technological means and ability to connect directly and speak directly to everyone who's interested in what he does, and do that on a personal level. It's his personal Twitter account, but speak on behalf of the company. And that conflict is a new kind of archetypal behavior that's only possible with our, obviously, Web 2 world. And so I always started thinking of the archetypes, and the dream of Life After Bob as a series would be to create almost like archetypal stories for each episode that focus on different characters, kind of in the way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has structured themselves, which I think is, whatever you think of those movies, Kevin Feige, the head producer, is like, he's created something really different and really successfully different on a whole other scale. And I think one of the beautiful structural things he's done is he's devoted entire movies to retelling you what that archetypal character is. I mean, it's very old archetypes, like Thor is like a Norse, you know, it's like a Norse god. Life After Bob the dream was to create archetypal stories for each characters, and then have them come together in this kind of Avengers moment in maybe the last episode, to see which way of living in this weird future actually is the most adaptive, almost like a kind of battle royale of which philosophy of living actually works when you live in a world where everything's changing faster than a human mind can adapt itself in its habits and its beliefs. And maybe that episode will be fully simulated. Maybe there'll be enough technological affordances by the time that episode's made where that can be like a fully alive thing, unscripted. Who knows? But that's sort of where a lot of my thinking is right now with Life After Bob. I'm sorry I can't address all the other questions because I'm struck by them, but I can't remember all of them. Winnicott, yes.
There's just one that I really liked, Judith, that you were talking about the missing mother. And this is like my own personal theory as like the producer, kind of watching Ian like write this movie and then, you know, direct this movie and talk about this movie, is that like, I think a lot of the drama of the movie starts with the trauma of like missing parent, the missing mother. And like, there's something really amazing about like how many people ask about that one character that's never mentioned. And you know, Ian, me, Vilo, and a few other people in the production like became parents during the making of this movie, and like it really is a movie about like parenting responsibility and like nurturing like the next, like, you know, your own the most important project of your life. And
that really comes through, I think.
It's very emotional, and people say, oh, it's such an emotional movie. It's like, not that we really, you know, played the violin. It wasn't Bambi, you know, but it was like, I think that people are really struck by the tragedy of everything that's happening with the politics, with the sci-fi, with the worlding. I think that people really understand that Bob is really a surrogate parent for Chalice. And, you know, the idea of AI as surrogate, you know, parent or a prosthetic for a single father or a single parent is like very, very interesting to people.
And is the AI in Bob able to actually have superpowers or to parent in a spectacular way? I'm really curious about, well, when Ian was mentioning the Marvel series, I'm really curious about, will AI allow us to invent superpowers in this story, and what will they be like, and how can we invoke our superpowers, which we'll surely need going forward, sad to say. But
if you don't mind me talking about task Bobs and affirmation Bobs, I just like to tease that a little bit more. So in Life After Bob, there are three versions of Bobs. There's the task Bob, which we kind of think is the 1.0, Dr. Wong's first invention, the Bob that helps you, achieve something that you really deeply want to achieve. It's like a coach, kind of gets you through all your tasks. The in-joke is that, a lot of NASA astronauts, the thing they need is a task Bob, because they just got to learn things and they got to do things and they got to tick the boxes. The second thing that Dr. Wong invented was an affirmation Bob. And this is more kind of like the therapist, the life coach, not the life coach, the therapist, the boost, the cheerleader, while you're going through a difficult time. And then the Destiny Bob was like the latest invention of Dr. Bob. It was like sort of the new top secret project of Dr. Wong's life. And that was kind of, in succession, the third in succession to the task Bob and the affirmation Bob. And this really closely traces with where he's at in his life. First of all, being a really busy scientist. Second, affirmation Bob, who knows what happened to mom? Maybe she left, maybe she died, who knows? We don't know, but whatever it was, he needed Destiny Bob to kind of inherit that role of parent.
Mhm.
And Ian can definitely speak to the superpower part of it, because Dr. Wong calls Chalice his Supergirl. So that's his sort of nickname for her.
Oh, that's super interesting. Do we have time for Ian to maybe respond, or before we have to move on, Dennis?
Can respond, and then also I just want to add to our audience, both online and in the room, that after Ian's response, we can also start taking questions. So, but go ahead, Ian.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say really briefly that, again, something that didn't make it into the story yet, but was written was like, task Bob, the corporate selling line was like, do you need a co-pilot for life's to-dos, task Bob, and then do you need a co-signer for life's bets, affirmation Bob. Like that moment where you're trying to decide whether to buy something or to ask someone out or to just make a decision. You just need someone to push you over the edge. That's an affirmation Bob. And I think in terms of superpowers, yeah, there's in the fantasy world of Life After Bob, Zim, the company, that publishes these, there's a whole gamut and range of almost there's a bot store, there's a Bob store with different levels of engagement that you want Bob to control and or assist your cognitive life, but also your neurological life. I want to emphasize that so much of Life After Bob was really based on an idea that the nervous system is such a beautiful thing. I think not enough sci-fi talks about it. I know there's neuromancer, but the nervous system itself, it's such an ancient thing. It is the interface between the external reality, however brutal it is, the pain we feel in that reality, and then the meaning and the sense of life potential that we twist that pain into, and even endure that pain and recode that pain in order to do something with our life and make it feel like that pain adds up to something that was worthwhile. The nervous system is the interface for all that complexity, all combined, condensed into this one system in our body. And I really was obsessed with the idea that the nervous system as maybe the heart and soul of what Life After Bob was wrestling over. Maybe I'll end there and we can take questions from there.
And, thank you. That was really helpful.
Great, thank you. And since we are having this event as a hybrid, both virtual and physical event, I want to give a chance to our audience in the room for questions. And I think the way to ask would be through the microphone, and I think Caroline can assist if anyone has any questions in the room.
Affirmation Bob. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very, very brilliant, very interesting presentation. I can't wait to do the experience. I was wondering about what you said, the wiki inputs, the inputs of the public with the users, with the smartphones. Did you have, well, this is very interesting because it blends the IA with the actual humans inputs. I love the idea. Did you have, or do you have to moderate some of the inputs? Is it sometimes leading to somewhere you wouldn't like the piece to go, or has it been a problem so far?
Maybe Viola, do you want to answer that one? It's an
I
interesting
mean,
question.
When we are creating works like this that involve public participation, right, I think it's important to remember the differences in scale between something like this and intent between something like this and something like a social media platform, and to what extent we're interested in actually seeing abuse of that platform. So I think, we, as, coming from the perspective of the arts, we have to do some due diligence to make sure that the platform is secure, and that, if there's any kind of hate speech or something like totally that we wouldn't want to feature, that it would be easy to moderate it. And in the past, we've done stuff, in if anybody saw the installation of Bob, the AI, there was representation of people's presence in that installation, and people could name their presence kind of whatever they wanted. So in the past, we've done, kind of very blunt stuff like profanity filters, things like that. But in terms of moderating this content, I think the balance that we settled on, sort of like the uneasy balance, is having certain elements of the world that are canonical, that would be very difficult to change, or that would resist change. And so there are actually AIs, little bots in the wiki that kind of crawl through and undo changes to certain entities in the wiki. But for the most part, we are curious what people's engagement with the world and with the wiki will be. And if somebody just goes on there to write profanity or unrelated speech, it's a wiki that anybody else could then potentially heal. And the idea would be that a wiki would be self-moderating. So we have built-in mechanisms to do the things where we, if we see there's a problem, we have to moderate it, but we don't do it necessarily preemptively, because we're not looking at the same kind of consequences as, if like Facebook or Instagram or some new nascent social media platform was to be like vandalized or something. It would actually kind of be an interesting thing to have somebody engage with the work in that way, I think.
And in the opposite sense, like Ian was like asking us if we knew who one of these amazing users was, who was writing incredible content that was inspiring him. So there's that opposite end too. It's not just like, oh, vandalism. There's also like people who engage in this incredible way.
Yeah, I was going to point that exactly that same thing out, Veronica. Like, there's this like Kevin Kelly idea of 1,000 true fans, and I think that's more true in our upcoming Web3 era than ever before. And we have at least one true fan on the wiki who's been writing very pithy, psychologically astute profiles for a specific class of thing in Life After Bob, which is these background crowd characters who all have specific names and who do appear in two very key scenes. And there's about 224 of those background characters in total. And this person has just been systematically, almost like a daily ritual, like writing 1 or 2 a day. And it's very beautiful just to watch. And I have no idea who this person is.
We should give them a movie.
We should give them an NFT.
Yeah.
We should make them a crowd character in the movie.
That would be easy. If we could find out who they are. It's like a Cinderella situation in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, Queenie's going to
I think
ask
there's
a
one more
question.
question from the room.
Yeah, and if
Thank you for your generous
want them
sharing.
to see you, you could stand up and stare at that camera. And this is my opportunity to frame Judith's invisible self as an act of resistance. I just wanted to give her the opportunity to have that seen as an act of resistance.
Yeah,
So Queenie, do you see the camera there?
Yeah, I'm also looking at my notes. So thank you for your sharing. You mentioned moving from programming and AI to storytelling, narrative, and now film. So I'm really curious to know, do you see the potential of this work thrive outside the art world and cinema? To what extent, in your opinion, this work could also serve as a prompt, maybe almost like a prototype, to talk to scientists, computer scientists, AI engineers, philosophers. So it's more like stimulating an interdisciplinary kind of conversations.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, the team's thought about this a lot, and the thing that I keep being obsessed with is this idea that a story is just a portal. And I don't mean just to diminish it, it's a very strong portal. And not every story is a portal. There's kitchen sink dramas that you watch it once, you understand its message or you enjoy it and that's fine, you like the actor. But when you make a world, and when you make especially like a sci-fi or fantasy world, it has the potential to be a portal to that world. But also I think in our case, it's a portal to the way in which media may be produced in the near or present future, and the way in which media will expand, especially ideas of new kind of metaversal experiences, ideas of a fictional world like Life After Bob being concurrent in many different forms, whether in mobile or a video game or an interactive experience, having a crypto economy. There's so many like new and interesting avenues for narrative fiction to actually like spread its wings and air itself out. And when I think about the bigger picture, the story itself is in a way the kind of the documentary slice of a world that can be infinitely expanded. So what we're looking at is just the map, but we're also, what we've been making hopefully is a territory, and what we're trying to co-make with a viewer, and hopefully with more Web3 technologies like crypto, co-make a huge territory whose end we don't know. Maybe the IP of Life After Bob will be ceded to a DAO that is governed by the 1,000 true fans of Life After Bob, so that stories of Chalice and whoever can continue on in a way that's has some semblance of coherence, but also takes the leaps of invention that new authors would have. I'm deeply interested in how narrative and stories are subject to natural selection. All the biblical stories, all our favorite fairy tales, these are stories that have been honed down through a process of natural selection on the story level. And I think I would love for the moment for us to re-engage in ways of thinking of stories on those much more expansive timelines. And I think now we have the technology to do so. So really, stories are just a portal.
I mean, can I just add to that a little bit? I think something that I'm really proud of with this particular story or this particular sort of project is the kind of exemplary nature of how you can build a world on top of these tools without kind of like scorched earth burning like the history that they're built on, right? Like something I'm deeply suspicious of is kind of like the fetishism for the new, right? Like this idea of like, this is going to be the new way we do things, or like, forget the way they used to do things, we have to do it this way. I think that the truly innovative, the truly like moving works that are innovative are ones that can take the existing kind of history that we've built on, which, as Ian is saying, like has are ways that we've told stories for millennia, and then later ways that we filmed stories or acted stories, and then we could just sort of see it as this continuum. So to answer, when I hear a question like this, I think that of course, like we can help move in that direction because we're continuing this progression, and in doing so, instead of trying to reinvent kind of the mechanics of storytelling, we're actually applying it to some visionary new sort of concepts, or these ideas of extending stories across platforms or across professions or across things like that. So something that we keep pointing to in this project from a technical and producing standpoint is we're not claiming to have created some kind of crazy new methodology. We've just sort of like looked at the tea leaves and looked at where we're going and said, all right, well, here are the strengths of the things that we know how to apply. Combining them together gets us this. And I think that's something to be really conscious of as we move into the new kind of work that's enabled by the technology.
I want to mention a little bit about like the way like our team, like the crew who worked on this is, we came from all different backgrounds and all different kinds of philosophies, all different kinds of disciplines and different kinds of skills. And like, I'm going to show my favorite producer shirt right now to you guys. It's like the Alice in Wonderland question of what kind of garden are you from? And it's like, the nice thing about a garden is that like, there's a lot of cross-pollination coming on. There's a lot of newcomers coming into this garden, and we influence each other. Like, Ian learned a lot from, the DP. The DP learned a lot from, our technical team. And this kind of project is so unique in that, like, we don't say, we always say yes to like the new, like something new that we can learn. And even if somebody doesn't understand the technology, like they don't know Unity, that's okay. Like we'll support those team members that don't, because I think it's really about that kind of spirit of collaboration and recognition, and like working with people that, you know, have that same kind of ideal or kind of same kind of passion for the script and the story, that makes the crew such an interesting and diverse group of people.
So I might ask a question. I see a certain tension that goes back to Faust, which is the artwork includes all the seductive, you know, bottom of the brainstem, you know, engineering of some of this software. And yet the meaning or the message seems deeply cautionary. So this might be crystallized down to a particular question. You know, how old will your daughter be before you let her have a cell phone or let her see Life After Bob?
Well, she's 2 years old now, and she's extremely interested in what happens on this computer screen all the time. She's bursting into my office room all the time. So she's seen probably every version of Life After Bob in some form. Just think about what you're asking me. When will my daughter get a cell phone? I mean, my wife and I had an agreement when we had our daughter that, you know, there's the thing that Freud says. He says the good mother necessarily fails. I think that would be true for a father too. The good father necessarily fails, meaning that, you know, you raise your kids to be not protected, but to be strong. And strength is, I think Judith touched on this a little bit. Strength in a child and fostering that value in a child would produce a kind of autonomy. You know, you want to set, this is me, my wife Rachel's philosophy, we want to set our children up for autonomy. We all have parents, they all exert influence over us from a very early age, whether they're the best parents ever or the worst parents ever. And they all, I learned this on this reality show called Couples Therapy. They all recruit you into their own unhappiness in some unconscious or conscious way. And as a child, of course, you want to be recruited by your parents to go along and help them do that. But that is an unwinning game. And I always believed in my own experience that at a certain point when you grow up, you have this distance with your parents, if you're able to create it, that allows you to have some autonomy. And if they're good parents, they will allow you to have it and stop seeing you as their child and start seeing you against their own pain. You know, I feel so much pain that the day that Eden will just like, I have to force myself to not be her parent, but I know that's the best thing for her autonomy and for her own self-sufficiency. So the kind of the writing of Life After Bob was very much influenced by maybe that argument.
That's fantastic, thanks. Dennis, do you want to take some of the online questions?
So we have a question from James, and this is, I think, for Ian, but for all of you. And James asks, can you say a bit more about the metaverse and what excites you about its future as a medium for expression and commerce?
Obviously thinking about the metaverse a lot. I mean, it's now kind of, my mom called me, what's the metaverse? She actually called me that the other day. She's like, Ian, are you interested in the metaverse? I've heard interesting definitions. I've heard the metaverse is when Discord servers become worlds. That's an interesting one. I've heard one where the metaverse is when focusing your energy and time on your digital life is worth more than your physical life. And I know that sounds really grim, but I think we're already kind of in that. I read this tweet the other day, and something to the effect of like, isn't it funny to remember that we're all effectively competing to hit the right keys on our keyboard in the right order, and that if we do it for a long enough time, we can buy a house. And it's just a reminder that because we're so interfaced with the internet, with our digital life, and that's all mediated through literally tapping on the keyboard, talking on the phone, or typing on our iPhone, that it does have a game-like it adds the game-like quality that maybe was always there in life, but now is just more conscious. I don't know, I've personally, for Life After Bob, I am very interested in the way in which intellectual property can be thought of differently. There's the Marvel Cinematic Universe view, which is understandable. It's top down. It comes from a whole lineage of comic books that's very heavily guarded, very valuable IP, all the superheroes. And they have a very strict top-down model. I imagine now with like crypto and with advances in, augmented reality, virtual reality, but especially actually with crypto, that there's a world where we can start to conceive of intellectual property as a bottom-up endeavor, perhaps where the community of the 1,000 true fans have a stake in where the IP goes. They have a rolling stake in its up and down value. When an IP becomes very unpopular, you can actually measure that with a token now. And when it surges in popularity, you can measure that with a token now. And I think these tools hold a lot of promise that we're only beginning to really understand and get our feet wet in. But I'm very excited about that aspect of creating a world, because it actually means the world isn't stuck in a fictional place. It actually, there's a definition of world, which is that which is, what is it? That which nourishes you across ages. This is like a German definition of world. Literally, the word world is that which nourishes you across ages. Maybe you can make a fictional world now that could actually nourish the people who we thought of as viewers or fans, but actually, if you're a real viewer or fan of like Star Wars or The Matrix, you're more than just a viewer, man. You're like part of your lens on reality is those worlds. Part of your soul in some room in your brain is occupied by trivial shit about what kind of crystals are inside a lightsaber, and like that's not nothing. Or now we can put a value on that, not just a monetary value, but like a spiritual value, that it's not nothing. It actually shapes your life. I think we're starting to see the technologies and the philosophy that can kind of start to begin to articulate the way in which these worlds become memes in yourself, in your nervous system, but then it could actually produce a better quality of life in your actual life. And wouldn't that be a beautiful thing?
That's very interesting. And Ian, I think I have the mirror question of this, which I'm very curious as well. And I think that is about this practice of world making and the practice of creating simulations. And the artist's practice generally brings a kind of newfound understanding or revelation about the physical world itself. So I'm curious, and you hinted at many times to this, but if you have anything to add, I'm curious, what does world making and creating simulations reveal to you about the world we live in? And what happens to the physical world when your practice is creating new worlds?
Interesting question. I think when I work on a simulation with like Veronica and with Ivilo, and like we're in the middle of an installation, like about to show the work. I mean, I'll let you guys speak to this, but for me, I start to see everything we look at in the physical world through the lens of like a simulation. Not that we live in a simulation, although that's an interesting, meme-like idea right now. But I start to see, the behavior of animals, people, as coded with a certain set of evolving rules. I mean, things start to look like the thing that you're working on in a way. Maybe I'll say that.
I think that this also maybe relates to the prior question as well, where because something like building a new world or this concept that people are now awakening to of the metaverse feels new, it feels like you're asking new questions. But in fact, those questions can be asked about the existing world and should be asked about the existing world. These questions of IP and about rights, about what is X or Y. I mean, we're thinking about these as novel concerns in the metaverse. But I think back to an anecdote where we were working on Bob, the first iteration of Bob, and it was kind of the 11th hour, and our brilliant sort of developer was in the middle of kind of rewriting the AI, the consciousness of Bob. And it's late at night, we're working, and he sort of looks up at Ian. and he says, okay, well, how do we define consciousness? What is consciousness? And it was a pragmatic question because he was trying to figure out how to simulate Bob, but it led to a discussion, like an hour and a half long discussion about like, well, what is consciousness, right? And the same, I think that's how I see this relationship, right? It's that we're asking these questions about the world in a very focused microcosmic way because it's the world we're constructing, but it reminds us that it's actually the same questions we've always been asking and that we should be asking.
I mean, one of the really exciting parts of like starting to work on Bob was that it really coincided when Ian got a puppy. And I think Ian really started talking a lot about his dog at that time. He was not yet a parent. But I think when he had Eden, his ideas about AI started getting even deeper and deeper. So I think that just him observing like these kind of small evolving. Sorry, my dad's leaving the house. He started asking all these questions like, yeah, like my dad is right there listening to this conversation. But yeah, he started observing Mars and how he was learning things. And I remember Judith asked this question, like, how did you start thinking about AI? And Ian had a very specific kind of idea about like how, you know, Mars might process information or learn something, or how Eden might surprise him in this way. And that would be an exciting kind of development in a potential AI. So they're the same questions because I think we observe the same world or a lot of the same things.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm just add, yeah, that's yeah. Oh, those are really, yeah, that's right. I would just add that I found in my experience as an artist and thinking about what I do and what's to do next, it's always come from whatever troubles me right now and whatever experiences I'm either was thrust upon me or that I'm very fearfully, but nonetheless wanting to do. And the devil's in the details. And I think there's a way in which we can talk about the metaverse abstractly or theoretically. There's a way in which we can talk about children theoretically. There's a way in which we can talk about AI theoretically. But I've learned the most by actually just, you know, I was working on this game called Bad Corgi. It's a failed iPhone game, but I got a corgi. That's our dog. That's the dog that Veronica is referring to, because I just needed to really know what it felt like to have a dog. You know, and I think that then really drives the spirit and the energy and the specificity that gives any artwork, I think, a certain sense of pleasure. It's hard to find pleasure in the abstract. It's in the details that you experience that everything really drive creative process.
Great statement to end on, Ian. Thank you so much. And Veronica and Ivalo, maybe you'll just hear some smattering of applause from the real world. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And maybe you can
yeah,
tune
really
in.
great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. This was a very inspiring panel with a lot of insights, and we're happy to have you here. And before we end, I just want to say that we are going to continue at 2 p.m. With our next panel with Rachel Rawson, Alexander Galloway, Aude Oliva, Eugene Brinkhammer, and Tobias Putre. So look forward to continuing this conversation throughout the day.
And we'll look for some online questions from Bob.
That would be great.
Thank you, Judith, for your insights. They were really great.
Oh, it's great to meet you all. I think this is such a terrific project. I can't wait to see the next steps.
Yeah, likewise. It's really exciting to have it out in the world and hear your reaction and sort of share it with everybody.
I encourage everyone to go on the Life After Bob wiki to kind of learn more about the world. Even if you can't make it to the shed, you can really read about it and get into that.
Lifeafterbob.wiki.
Oh yeah, we're doing our job. And the shed closes on December 19th. I'll just really do my job here. Yeah. So in case, you know, there's still time if you're interested to go and have, you know.
No, that's good to know, actually. I'll try to promote it. I think it's so interesting, especially for people in the audience.
Your legs, run across the street and see the exhibition. Get something to eat outside. We're not allowed to eat in here. And see you back at 2, I hope.